Whatever we say on air in the next hour of live TV, believe me, this is not a witch hunt against Huw Edwards personally. I'll tell you why. I know exactly what it's like to have the mob calling for your head and to be public enemy number one. But what I would say is this, that clearly something has gone badly wrong at the BBC. Throughout the show tonight, we'll be talking to people who have intimate knowledge of how the state broadcaster works and who can hopefully answer a question that is on everybody's lips. What went wrong? We'll start first with TalkTV reporter Victoria Innes. She's outside BBC headquarters, Broadcasting House. Victoria, good to have you on. Can you tell me the latest, please?
Good evening, Jeremy. Well, where things stand this evening, and perhaps the most serious development over the last few days, has been confirmation tonight from the BBC that some journalists inside the building behind me knew about claims against their colleague presenter Huw Edwards before the material was first published in the Sun newspaper at the end of last week. We now know that it was Victoria Derbyshire and her Newsnight colleagues who were leading the search. The BBC said in a statement they were following initial soundings, which, in normal circumstances, when journalists receive such information, they would pursue, which they did over the weekend and into the beginning of this week. Now, those findings were presented on the Newsnight programme last night. It was said that 2 current and former BBC employees, 3 in total, claimed they had received text messages from Mr Edwards of a flirtatious nature. They say that because of his position of power, they felt that it was inappropriate and they couldn't go to senior executives. Now, this will raise serious questions this evening for senior executives over the divide between them and journalists. Now, the BBC's Director General, Tim Davies, said a few days ago he wasn't aware of allegations until July the 6th, the same day that the presenter was made aware of them. But who knew what and when is likely to form much of the conversation over the next few days. And that, Jeremy, is where things are this evening. Thank you, Victoria, and his brilliant outside Broadcasting House for TalkTV. Joining me now, first up, is former BBC Chief Political Correspondent. Delighted to have him on. John Sargent, welcome to Jeremy Kyle Live. Can I just ask you the initial question that I've asked everybody, John? What was your reaction when you first heard about the revelations about Huw Edwards?
I was shocked and so surprised. I've known Huw for more than 30 years, both as a colleague and as a friend. We were political correspondents together for the BBC. And when I heard this and somebody said, "Oh, you know who it is," and I couldn't believe it. I just thought, well, everything that we've been hearing about, these allegations, about the bad language, about threatening people, bullying people, just did not seem to be at all like the Huw Edwards that I've known for so long.
Interesting, isn't it, that one of the criticisms, John, and I said at the beginning of the show, this is not personal. I know what it's like to be hounded, and certainly we have to bear in mind, as we said last night on the show, he's currently in hospital receiving treatment, and that is important to point out. But for me, this is about the BBC. Tim Davie is the editor-in-chief. And any of us who work in television know that the editor-in-chief is supposed to be aware about what's going out and what's going on. Today, tonight, you heard from Victoria Innes then, further allegations that a programme under his remit was investigating one of his star presenters, and still apparently he knew nothing. And my question tonight, John, is where are all these faceless BBC managers, high-ranking execs on large salaries who seemingly haven't shown themselves at all?
Well, no, come on, hold on a moment. What the BBC have said, they will now continue to press ahead with their inquiry, the police having decided that there was no evidence of criminal actions. Now, what we do want to do, and certainly what I would like to do as a friend of Huw's, is just for everyone to calm down a bit and wait for the investigation to get underway. And then you can have all these arguments. You can start writing to the BBC, you can go on complaining about it. But broadly speaking, when someone is in a mental hospital and they're seriously ill, this is not the moment to row and argue and complain about things, because the person needs to be given a chance to get better. And the BBC have stressed quite rightly now that they're worried about duty of care. Well, that seems to me not a moment to start saying, where was Tim Davie? What about this? Can't we go on with the argument as if nothing has happened, as if we know nothing about Huw and his hospital condition? It seems crazy.
No, I absolutely agree, and I made the point last night, John, and I made it just then to you. I completely understand. I would suggest, respectfully, that duty of care should actually cover every person in this thing. The victim...
Sure, no, of course.
You know,
and the BBC... Yeah, the BBC have said that. So what you can't do is say, oh, well, we now know all this, we know the extra detail, we know who the person is, we know all the points that have been made, but let's just go back to 2 days ago and have the whole argument all over again about isn't the BBC a shambles and isn't this awful? I just think this is the moment for a gentle pause, that's all. But you obviously don't think that. You want to argue the whole thing out. The BBC will not produce people. They will not produce facts. The police won't go on giving more evidence because they said there's no evidence.
Well, there are only victims in this, but I find it astonishing. Let's take Tim Davie out of the equation. Where are all these faceless execs on hundreds of thousands of pounds who would not have... And the point I was making to John Sargent was they were Newsnight were looking into this, and still apparently nobody senior knew. I think that's a really relevant question, don't you?
Oh, well, Jeremy, I should at the outset make it clear that I also worked very closely with Huw in the BBC's political unit, along with John Sargent and Huw Edwards. And my experience of working with him was of somebody who was clearly ambitious, destined for stardom, but always absolutely charming, respectful, and great fun to work with. On your point, I mean, what we were hearing from your correspondent at the BBC is that the Newsnight team were investigating this in the last few days. I would say that the BBC News journalists are absolutely to be commended for continuing to pursue and to try and cover a story under the most difficult of circumstances when it concerns a situation within the building. She also said that the 3 people who apparently received inappropriate messages, none of them referred this up. None of them even told their own immediate bosses at the BBC. And Tim Davie is the Director General of a huge corporation. We're employing tens of thousands of people. And yeah, I would say perhaps if there were a whole series of incidents like this, there should have been direct managers in the news team who were aware of this, who were looking into it and were perhaps approaching Huw Edwards rather sooner than they did. But Tim Davie himself has said that the corporation will look at why the original complaint was not red flagged, taken more seriously, more swiftly. I think there are legitimate questions there. But I think the idea that BBC journalists should not be looking into this story, I think their coverage has actually
Can I just say, I've got the ledger.